The pandemic revealed just how essential some jobs really are to the nation, with the agonizing months under lockdown showing parents the indispensable roles of teachers in America. A recent op-ed in the New York Times renews a call for raising the salaries of teachers, making the case that six-figure salaries might help slow the ongoing exodus of educators in the industry and improve the quality of learning in America. So Colette Coleman is the author of that op-ed. She's also a sociologist and a former teacher, and she is with us now to discuss closing the pay gap. Thanks a lot for joining us, Colette. Full disclosure, I am the daughter of a retired teacher, so I have a bias. I know how hard they work, especially the very good teachers out there. So tell us first about you, what drew you to teaching initially, and then what led you to eventually leave the profession.
Sure. So I started off after college actually working in finance on Wall Street, and it was a great experience, but I wanted to do something that was more impactful day to day, and what better than teaching. So I joined a program called Teach for America and got placed at a middle school in Los Angeles and was teaching there. And again, it's a really rewarding profession, and I was able to feel that I was having that day-to-day impact. But ultimately, I guess I don't have a parent who's a teacher, and I didn't realize just how hard the job is. And so the conditions were really rough. And as we'll be discussing, the salary also felt like it just wasn't commensurate with the level of the workload.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how much teachers are making on average in the United States and how an increase in pay might benefit both educators and students.
Sure. So the salaries really vary across the nation, depending where you are, and also depending on whether you're just starting out or you've been teaching for decades. So the starting salary average, I believe, is around $40,000. And there was a push on the campaign trail. A lot of the presidential candidates a couple of years ago were most of them, pushing for teacher raises. And Kamala Harris, she had a proposal for about, I think it was $13,500, somewhere around there, which would get the average salary to around $70,000 to $75,000.
You write in your op-ed that kind of before the pandemic, there was a focus on how much teachers are making, because we had started to see sort of different walkouts and strikes across the country. And a lot of that had to do with what the teachers were making, and also, what they were given in terms of resources in their classrooms. That it wasn't just that they weren't making a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of money to work with within their classroom, and they were dipping into their own income to buy books and pencils and stuff for their kids. Part of the problem is how education is funded in this country, and there have been a lot of conversations about property taxes and whether we have to change the funding. But local budgets could not support the kind of pay increases that you're talking about. So where do you propose this money would come from?
Well, there have been, it's been a very interesting past year with the pandemic. And there, even during this time, were districts that were looking to raise property taxes and find places within their local areas to get the money to raise teachers' salaries, because a lot of districts are just losing teachers in a way that they can't keep up with. So something does have to be done. And like you mentioned, it's not just the salaries. It's also, can you imagine if a fire station was putting out calls on Twitter, can you fund our hoses? But for teachers, somehow it's accepted that, I need these materials for my classroom. I'm going to do some crowdfunding to get them, which just seems absurd.
So, Colette, recent surveys have found more teachers are leaving the field and fewer college students are getting into it, or graduates of college. Are you concerned about a possible teacher shortage, and do you believe that a six-figure salary is what's needed to turn this around?
So I am concerned about a teacher shortage, and it's still to be seen what will happen post-pandemic. I know there have been some surveys that show more teachers, they're just so burned out from this tough last year that there'll be even more of an exodus. But I think that the money is a big part of it. It's not a panacea. It's not the only issue. It's not just about pay. But for kids who are just coming out of college, a lot of them do think, I want a career where I can easily support a family and feel comfortable. And like I mentioned in the op-ed, I remember if something came up, like I had an unexpected dental bill, it's just very stressful to be working so hard and to not know how you're going to pay it. And then at the same time, I could get a side job that I do after school or on the weekend, and most teachers do have second jobs, and get paid so much more for work that wasn't nearly as hard. So I think there's also an element of just the demoralization of that, of feeling undervalued, since we do in our society oftentimes use money to represent how we value people.
So that brings me to this question. This is a country that talks about how our youth and our children are the future, but you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? And at the same time, sometimes I'm sort of flabbergasted at how put off some parents are, when they hear teachers talk about raising, their income. You hear things like, well, you got the whole summer off, what do you want? And I think they have no, sort of real understanding of how much work it takes to be a good teacher, that it's not an 8 to 3 p.m. or 2:30, whenever the kids leave. It's not that kind of a job. You're a teacher sort of 24/7. And when you're not teaching in class, you're preparing, you're gathering stuff. When you're in the summertime, you're preparing for the upcoming year. So I've never really understood why there's such a resistance to investing in education in this country. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I think you bring up the good point that everyone always brings up the summer, the critics of this idea. And I think it's hard for a lot of people to understand why teaching is hard. They might feel like, say you're an elementary school teacher, oh, you're hanging out with kids all day. And of course, that's not what it is. And just to say, I did teach summer school when I was a teacher. And like I mentioned, most teachers during the school year even have second jobs, but you are after school calling parents, you're preparing lessons, you're grading. So it's not that you show up at 7:30 and leave at 2:30. If you were to, do the math and say, okay, every day teachers are working 12-hour days, then who cares about having the summer off, because it's going to even out that you're still basically working the full year if you were to be working a 40-hour week. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe people need more insight into understanding what the profession actually entails. And not to mention, in a lot of districts, they're understaffed. So when I was teaching, it wasn't just that I was a teacher. I also felt often like I'm a social worker, I'm a nurse. There are so many hats that you have to wear that also adds to the taxing nature of the job.
Colette, before we let you go, let me just ask about what the pay for teachers at the top end of the scale is on average, because as Tamarie's question about teacher pay across the country, the world, I note that the United States will never be like Luxembourg, which is a tiny country in the middle of Europe that, teachers earn like $100,000 after a couple of years of teaching. I know that it will never be like that in the United States, but teachers on average who are in the profession for at least 15 years can make upwards of $70,000. Are my numbers right? And is that that does seem fairly high compared to other countries, for example, like France and Israel and even Germany?
Yeah, so you are right. And that's part of the pushback as well, is that you'll have a teacher who has been teaching for a couple of decades and they're maybe at six figures. So they don't see, why are we complaining? Teachers are making six figures. But if you have to wait for 20 years to get there, we're going to lose so many people along the way. And then the other issue that we spoke about earlier, just how do you attract talent into the profession? And if it's a profession that's of such high importance, we really do want people being excited to enter it.
Important information. Colette Coleman, thank you very much for coming and talking to us about it. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.